Welcome, everybody. I'm Julian Kitchen. I'm editor of the book that we're highlighting chapters from today, and I'm also the editor of Studying Teacher Education Journal. So delighted to have 30 of us present today for this webinar, and hopefully many others who will be watching it later recorded. The reason for the book was a sense that we don't really know a lot about how people actually write. And when I look at writing books, and I taught writing when I was a secondary school teacher, most of them are prescriptive and rules-based and tells you these are the steps that you follow. And yet I always found that that's not actually how I wrote or how anyone I knew wrote. And so I thought it'd be really great to have a book where people who write well in self-study talked about how they go about writing. And rather than just telling you how to write, also show you how they write on their own, how they write with others, how they write in different mediums and so on. So today's session has 3 presentations that involve different forms of artistic expression. Eliza, are you putting up the slides soon? So just so I can make sure I get it right. And the first presentation will be focused on narrative approaches and intimate scholarship, and with a team of people talking about how. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, we'll move on. These are the slide we just saw has the 4 sessions, and so the first one, Stephanie Pinniger, Trudy Cardinal, Sean Murphy, and Janice Huber will be talking about intimate scholarship and a narrative approach to thinking about self-study writing. And they really do a great job of showing how the process of narrative is important, but also how it gives them a chance to go deeper into understanding themselves and each other. The second one deals with poetic play in self-study and using poetry as a means to both as data and as a representation of one's understanding. And I can think of no one better to talk about that than Kathleen Pithouse Morgan and Anastasia Samaras. And then the third one involves visuals in meaning making with Deb Tidwell and Svanborg Johnstarter. And I remember my very first council conference, I heard Deb present some of her caricatures or cartoons. And it was quite amazing to see that it was powerful data and also a powerful way of representing what she came to know as a self-study practitioner. And Svanborg uses other visual mediums as well. So hopefully from these 3 presentations, you can get a sense of some of the possibilities of using artistic representation, both as your data and as your representation of your understandings of self-study. So I thank the 3 groups for their excellent chapters, which I encourage you to look at in the book, which has just come out with Springer. And also I thank them for presenting today. I also thank Eliza for putting all this together. There's a huge amount of behind the scenes work in doing this. So thank you, Eliza. And joining her for future ones is Lara Kassab, who's watching today, but will be helping out with the next session, and we'll be following in Eliza's footsteps after or next year. So Lara, thank you for jumping into that role. We really appreciate it. So without further ado, I turn it over to Stephanie and her group to talk about writing toward knowing.
Unmute.
There we go. Thank you, Stephanie. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Our chapter is called Writing Toward Knowing, Crafting Intimate Scholarship. It's a part of the book that Julian edited, and we're looking forward to sharing our ideas with you today. Thank you.
In our presentation, we focus on articulating the challenge of intimate scholarship writing. Our commitment is to our research and the reader. A fundamental challenge for good writers is to show, our commitment is to our research and the reader. Therefore, in the chapter on which this presentation is based, We use quotes from a piece that had received an Outstanding Publication Award. A fundamental challenge for good writers is to show and not tell. We present the challenges to good writing posed by intimate scholarship, provide an exemplar quote from the article, and then link analysis. We invite you to engage with the actual chapter in order to better understand the nuances and balances required in writing from a perspective of intimate scholarship.
Challenge 1, dual positioning of intimate scholarship. Intimate scholarship has a dual nature. It is intimate, meaning that just like an intimate relationship, it is honest and open. The author in intimate scholarship positions her or himself in a close and warm relationship to readers, and the knowledge represented emerges carefully through scrutinized, interrogated, and investigated familiar or sometimes personal and private experience and the knowing of it. Simultaneously, its goal is also academic, and the writer commits to contribute to the educational research conversation new unearthed knowing from embodied knowing or experience. Therefore, such scholarship and the writing of it has a dual nature. It is both intimate and scholarship. The writing challenge is that written accounts of such inquiries require an authentic voice that expresses the report of the study in a scholarly or academic register and is also an honest expression of what it is, warts and all, from the perspective of the author. The report of the inquiry seeks to knit together intimate, expounded knowing with the academic. Intimate scholarship is filled with passion, irony, and emotion, but never apathy, ambivalence, or disinterest. As researchers, we can cultivate this dual voice by including in our written accounts our own voice, concern, and knowing in relationship to the things we uncover in our studies. We attend to the scholarly by considering theory, by seeking diverse voices and finding about the concepts we are pursuing, our consideration of theory and our attention to the multiplicity by taking a reasoned approach in our writing. Thank you.
Challenge 2, the conundrums embedded in characteristics of intimate scholarship. The dilemma of relationships and ethics in intimate scholarship. Representing our own unsettling truths in our less than stellar action or thinking is an inquiry based in intimate scholarship. While difficult, may not be problematic, but when such accuracy draws others in or requires that we do not smooth the stories we seek to tell, then issues of relationship and ethics emerge. As we construct such accounts, we are faced with the dilemma of how much needs to be said when relationships are difficult, or how much of a context that is problematic needs to be explained to present the understandings and the meaning making that emerged in the study. The intimate scholar, because of the commitment to scholarship, wants to be as truthful and forthcoming as possible, regardless of difficult truths or experiences that need to be reported. Second, the predicament of ontology and the value of the particular. When we write about our studies of intimate scholarship, because it is positioned in a relational ontology and focused on the particular, we are always engaged in a predicament of determining how much context and how much detail needs to be in the account. When we construct reports of intimate scholarship, because it is our story, we always know more than we need to say or than should be said in order to account for the knowing we gain from our inquiry experience. Determining how much to say to communicate about what is and the characteristics of the particular is most often a harrowing editing experience. We find ourselves constantly questioning which quotes are most compelling and best buttress our assertions for action or understanding, or provide the clearest evidence of the trustworthiness of the meaning we have uncovered. We have concern about not being overly informative, being relevant, including in our narrative sufficient detail to communicate, but not engage in prolixity, and avoiding unnecessary obscurity and unintentional ambiguity. Because we are interested in the particular, we often deliberately take up explorations of things that may have been forbidden in scholarship in the past, or represent new and unreported concepts and ideas, Yet there are limits of pages and attention span that need to be taken into account. How do we say more by saying less? Trustworthiness, variability, and the tensionness of openness and uncertainty. Intimate scholarship exists in a space of openness and uncertainty. It is never closed. Even published studies are open to be reinterpreted because they are grounded in a relational ontology, also because the focus is on the particular. The studies do not claim generalizability, but invite readers to interrogate their own context and their own knowing in relation to the work they study. Intimate scholarship exists in an uncertain space since the researcher acknowledges that knowing will shift, that the context will evolve, and the knowledge of participants will change unpredictably. This leaves researchers in a challenging space. In such an uncertain, open, and vulnerable space, the researcher must proceed with authenticity, veracity, and confidence. In intimate scholarship, where authors are vulnerable, where interpretation is never final, and where the inquiry space is uncertain, it is through the whole of the account that trustworthiness is established and these issues are resolved.
Challenge 3, the use of the personal voice. One of the hallmarks of intimate scholarship is the use of first person, except indirectly quoted data. This use is important because it fronts the intimate aspect of the scholarship and signals the willingness of the author to be in ethical relationship with the reader. Employing and maintaining the use of the personal voice and yet communicating the purpose, process, and understandings that emerge in scholarly voice is not simple. The challenge for the intimate scholar is to establish a personal voice and yet do so while engaging a scholarly register. Intimate scholarship is presenting findings from an inquiry, carefully crafted and enacted research study. The author is agreeing to provide only the necessary information, that the information provided will not be false or without evidence of its veracity, that what is said will be relevant, and that the writing will be clear and forthright, avoiding obscurity and unintentional ambiguity. Research based in modernist epistemology established its credibility through camouflage, essentially hiding the features of a context that would make it identifiable and utilizing a distanced voice to communicate the viability of generalizability and a lack of bias, objectivity.
Challenge 4, transforming writer-based prose to reader-based prose. When a researcher embraces intimate scholarship, the task of using reader-based prose becomes an imperative. One of the reasons for this challenge is that since the researcher is often and usually the researched or in some way a participant in the inquiry, the researcher knows more than needs to be said about the context, the process, and the evidence in order to create a readable, understandable, and trustworthy account. To articulate the study, the intimate scholar faces the challenge of what potentially exists in his or her head as a writer-based account into reader-based prose. This is partly because the researcher may feel that just telling the story will be enough. In the face of this understanding, the writer fails to take up the more difficult task involved in shaping narrative forms of intimate scholarship into the necessary reader-based prose that communicates more complicated and complex concepts using narratives. Since many times intimate scholarship relies on narrative structures and narrative exemplars, writers meet the challenge of producing reader-based prose most likely to make a clear, compelling, trustworthy account of the study by creating a shared language and context, transforming facts into concepts, using stories strategically to create knowledge of complex concepts, and finally, honoring the contract between reader and writer for mutually useful discourse. In scholarly work, the author must link together concepts with relevant proof. The author of reader-based prose treats the reader with respect and makes the connections the reader needs to arrive at the understandings the scholarship has the potential to produce.
We end with a quote from Trudy that represents intimate scholarship and the kind of writing it demands. Intimate scholars have the challenge of writing themselves out of the conventional academic writing plot in order to make a space where they can write themselves into the academic and scholarly discourse. This is the space in which they uncover their embodied knowledge of teaching and teacher education holistically rather than piecemeal. As they attend to the challenges confronted in this writing and honor their contract with readers using readers of their writing, then becomes scholarship others can use. They produce scholarly writing about problems in ways that interconnect everything expressed in an ethically grounded relational epistemology and ontology. This kind of writing is not simple. While not fiction, it draws on our most creative selves, asking that we invent new types of scholarly writing and open space for personal expressions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie and Sean. And I encourage you to read the chapter to really see what they're doing. They've sort of had to tell what they were doing, but the chapter really shows it to you, as well as does Sean and Stephanie's other work, if you were to search for some of their intimate scholarship and narrative writing as well. So thank you both very much. And now we move to the second group, Kathleen Pithouse-Morgan and Anastasia Samaras, who'll be talking about polyvocal poetic play with dialogue. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Julian. And good morning from, good evening from South Africa. Good morning to those who are in the US and Canada and other parts of the world. And it's really wonderful to be here with colleagues to talk about this topic that is so close to many of our hearts. And I am Kathleen Pithouse-Morgan from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And I'm delighted to be with my colleague Anastasia Samaras. Anastasia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Anastasia Samaras. I'm a professor of education at George Mason University, and I really am so appreciative for this session and for you joining us from so many places around the globe.
Thanks, Anastasia. Next slide, please. Our work together that we are sharing in this chapter is situated within our evolving conceptualization of what we call polyvocal self-study research. And the theoretical roots of our polyvocal self-study research are in Bakhtin's detailed study of polyvocality as a narrative method in the fiction of Dostoevsky, who interplayed diverse voices and perspectives in his writing. And polyvocal narrative methods are also evident in the work of contemporary authors, such as American novelist Toni Morrison and Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. These authors interweave different voices and viewpoints in their novels. From our perspective, literary arts-inspired enactments of polyvocality, exemplified by plurality, interaction and interdependence, and creative activity, extend ways of performing and representing self-study scholarship. Next slide, please. Published writing produced within and across our transdisciplinary self-study research communities in South Africa and the USA exemplifies co-creativity, or which is what we call collective creativity, through the co-composition of poetry, dialogue, and vignettes. Members of these self-study communities, many of whom are with us today, have found that creative writing practices can have many benefits. A literary arts-inspired fusion of poetry and dialogue has enabled and enriched our long-standing transcontinental self-study research conversations, which we have described as thinking in space. Our explorations in using poetry and dialogue are not limited to our interactions with each other. We readily shared and enacted the method with our students and colleagues as we collectively and extensively examined our work in supervision and facilitating self-study learning communities and over time. And that work also allowed us to study what we had learned across our universities, which we captured through dialogue and poetry with colleagues from each of our universities. Next slide, please.
We know as far back as Barnes, who spoke of the Castle proceedings in 1998, that self-study scholarship has been characterized as interactive and collaborative. And our polyvocal self-study research has moved us to a multifaceted understanding of that collaboration as we work perhaps and transcend beyond being critical friends. Kathleen and I have been practicing as complementary colleagues, which comes out of John Steiner's work, a Vygotskian scholar, who describes it as a trust with each other's willingness to take risks in creative endeavors. And that is actually essential to creativity. We've been able to work together amazingly, despite the fact that we are not on the same continent, not in the same time zone. And we have worked virtually with each other and with some wonderful colleagues in both of our places and elsewhere in a pluralistic method in what we call virtual bricolage. So what we're experiencing in this thinking in space is crossing into almost a different realm of knowing research, and particularly a different way of knowing method. We improvise, we establish beyond form. What we most discover really is through our transdisciplinary and in research communities with faculty. So those transdisciplinary disciplinarity has transformed our professional lenses and really also being playful with each other, which we have found to be essential to professional development, our own and that of our colleagues. And we actually later wrote about this nourishing our professional souls in an article in Educational Forum. Next slide, please. So what difference can poetry and dialogue make in self-study scholarship? As self-study scholars, we continue to ask ourselves questions about our practice, and we build on earlier questions, as you'll see in this presentation. We let our questions direct our self-study research, and we use methods freely and in combined ways. We build on the work of our wonderful self-study scholars who've done so much in artistic representation and work in self-study. And we have been playing with and combining visually rich digital work, such as rich pictures and mood boards and photography and dance and drawing. And all of that builds on the earlier work of other people that have been doing memory work and artifacts and object work and collage. And that is all as a way to experiment, to explore, and to co-create. For this chapter, what we did was we combined poetry and dialogue as we also look back at our work that we had done together and the work that then propelled us forward, which continues to propel us forward in continued co-creativity. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you.
One back, please, Eliza. Thank you. So for this chapter, we started by looking back at our published poetry over a number of years, and we chose 6 poems that really spoke to us. And to move our current inquiry forward, we inserted the text of those 6 poems into an online vocabulary visualization tool called WordSift, which generated a word cloud that made visible to us our 50 most frequently used words, which you can see there. Next slide, please. As a next step, and this was an unfolding, not pre-planned process, we chose 8 focal words from the word cloud as a starting point for creating a poetic bricolage, using the text of the 6 selected poems as source material. And bricolage is something that we have been using together for a number of years. And it signifies, when it's used in the arts, it signifies the construction or creation from a diverse range of available things. So we constructed a poetic bricolage from available material offered by our published poems. And this then offered us a container for a gradual distillation of our multifaceted and complex learning experienced over time. We chose to arrange the poetic bricolage using the traditional Japanese renga design, which is a type of linked verse poetry, usually generated by 2 or more poets as a kind of conversation. And we blended poetic tradition with digital technology by co-creating the renga over several days via emails between South Africa and the USA. For each stanza, we began with a word from the word cloud, and then put together the rest of the stanza around that central word. And in this way, we created our poem, Polyvocal Poetic Play. Witness the brave heart, a whole heart healing process, remembering self, knowing and re-knowing self through polyvocality. Create open space for sharing, interaction, active listening, diverse dynamic learning, research professional practice, the power of we, self, difference, confluence in many voices, multiple professionals, making methodology, growth, inspiration, challenge, deepen and extend. Change is possible, power of inventiveness, impact, bringing new knowledge. Next slide, please. As we arranged the renga poem, we saw how each stanza could serve as an entry point for further exploration and dialogue. And building on this, in response to the renga, we created a dialogic bricolage by combining excerpts from published dialogues that accompanied the 6 selected poems. And on the slide, you can see the publications that those poems and dialogues were drawn from over a number of years. And then we lightly edited our chosen extracts for flow and coherence. And we're just going to read you one example of a stanza and then a little piece of dialogue that accompanied it. So the stanza was growth, inspiration, challenge, deepen and extend, change is possible. So I begin the dialogue. We developed a deep and dialogic understanding of why we are drawn to facilitate the development of transdisciplinary self-study communities.
We both appreciated our work in taking us to the edge of possibilities, and especially when we did not know where our initiatives would take us. We have given ourselves permission to play with new ideas and pedagogies and ways to research those. We sanction and value play with passion and purpose for ourselves and for our students, and encourage our diverse students and colleagues to keep exploring. It does get complicated because we're breaking so much new ground, so we have to be patient with the process.
One of the connections that has been very strong between the self-study learning communities in South Africa and in the USA has been our focus on creativity and the arts. Arts-inspired research practices have worked well for us to visualize our changing use of self-study methodology through place, time, and space. Next slide, please.
And as we're looking forward, we do recognize and have experienced that self-study scholars might not see themselves as artists, but they can come together and enjoy playing with the elements of the arts. The hands-on experience of composing poetry and dialogue, especially when it's done with trusted critical friends, can infuse professional practice and research with inventiveness, emotion, and fresh insights. There is generativity of making time and space for arts-inspired, playful writing. This is particularly valuable in higher education milieu that often seems to favor a more linear production and measurable outputs over the extemporary processes of mutual learning and discovery. Next slide, please. And then as we work forward, and this is work that we've actually published and presented after the writing of this chapter. You'll see that we continue to learn and love what we do because we can. And we're grateful to our self-studies colleagues whose work informed ours, and to those colleagues and students who joined us along the way. Co-creativity is worth exploring, as is questioning what method can be, and with each of us as self-study scholars, adding our contributions to the field. Next slide, please. Oops. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you both. The chapter is a beautiful work. You've got a little bit of a flavor for it, but the real poetry comes out in actually reading the chapter. Also, Anastasia and Kathleen are editing an upcoming special issue of Studying Teacher Education on poetic representations. So we're looking forward to that work as well. They talked about giving permission to play, and I think that's true for both of the presentations so far, and it's certainly true for the one to follow. It looks like Deb's not here still. She had an appointment which may have delayed her. So I'll turn it over to Svanborg, John's daughter, to talk about visuals as meaning making, and Deb may end up joining her at some point. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, this is us, Deborah Titwell, which some of you probably know, now Professor Emeritus, and I am Svanborg. And hello from Iceland. It's a bit cold now, but it will later get warmer. So the next one. Next slide. Yeah. So our chapter, Visuals as Meaning Making, is the chapter that we wrote, Deb and I. And as you know, visuals have long been a part of meaning making in educational research, such as charts or graphs and visuals for context and so on. And of course, also in the human existence, visuals have been much longer existing. And arts-based and creative methods in self-study have been a part of the self-study community from its inception, which is one of the things that was very attractive to me. So both I and Deb have used arts-based approaches in our practice and scholarship. Next. Next slide, please. I cannot see the next slide. That's too far. Yes, thank you. We have more support of theories in our chapter, but we like Eisner's argument that there are three areas represented in arts-based research: the practical knowledge emerging from local circumstances and contexts, and the production of making something, and the power of one's control over producing knowledge and discriminating knowledge. And research-driven use of visuals include data articulation, data collection, and/or data analysis. Next, please. We have some examples of our different uses of visuals. And for example, I started using visual note-taking. For example, in 2015, I was listening to Gloria Ladson-Billings, and this kind of note-taking helps me to both to analyze what I'm listening to, and also provides me with a quick overview of the meaning when I want to remind myself of what was there, what was talked about. And I both use images and words to complement each other. Next, please. I have sometimes in our teaching, I often teach with Hafdís Guðjónsdóttir, and she was once talking about inclusive education, and I was standing beside her with a flip chart, and I started drawing and writing keywords from her talk. So this was kind of meant for the students that were listening, to provide them with further meaning or visual meaning of what she was saying, and making visible the key points. And I was also interpreting the messages. And the purpose was to engage the students in the lecture. Next, please. Another way we have used visual language, I and my colleagues, is that in a course that included reading, which was watching or choosing a movie about education or about teachers' work. And we let them interpret the films they watched in this way, in a 3D representation. And in this picture, they were explaining the films October Sky and Life as a Stage, and they had come to an agreement about what theme that was that exemplified both of the films. So this was a group work. Next, please. Is Deb here? Probably not. So she has been using both objects as data, which is very interesting, and you can read more about in the chapter. And also she's been drawing nodal moments as data, and it's really good to see those expressions from her, and you get kind of even more than just with reading what she is then explaining in words. So you can read kind of the storyline of her experience as an administrator that she describes with these drawings. Next, please. I think there's one before that one. Yeah. I saw it for a moment, but it's not this one. Yes, this is an example of how Hafdís and we were writing a chapter about our collaboration in self-study, and we had gathered data through walks and talks, and we had come to a point where we felt the data was being saturated. So we started to work on analyzing our data, and we also pulled together which writings we had done during those last 10 years, I think it covered. And we became a little bit stuck on how we would approach this and what we were actually doing with our research. So I came up with the idea of drawing a kind of an image of all the papers we had written together. And if you look closely, there are different kind of analysis of each of the chapters or papers we wrote. And there are some symbols also within the pictures, like some of the persons that wrote the papers are blurred. And that means that we were usually 3 of us doing this research, Hafdís, I, and Karen Ruth. But sometimes 2 of us would write a chapter, but the third one was always there behind us and supporting us. So that's the blurred persons. And you can see that if you look closely, you can see an image of Iceland peeking out from 2 of the papers. And that means that those were papers written in Icelandic. And we discovered through this process that it was kind of interesting that we only had written 2 papers about our self-study research in Icelandic. And there was also a red thread throughout all of these papers and the writing and research, which was the trans-languaging work that we needed to do through our publications in English and in Icelandic, actually. And it was not only a challenge, but it was also an opportunity to grow, to have to do this trans-languaging dance or bilingual dance. So next slide, which I think is the last one, it's our conclusions. I guess Deb is not here yet. So we have found this using these diverse ways of making meaning that it has strengthened our understanding of our practice in different ways. Next point. And this is a pronunciation exercise for me. Deb's use of an object as data further illuminates the promise of objects in generating social, cultural, and autobiographical interpretive portrayals of lived educational experience, and it expands scholarly conversation about what counts as data and analysis in educational research. And we are citing Pillay. And the use of drawings helps us to explicate different moments, specific and context-rich experiences which provide insights into meaning, thinking processes, and action found within professional practice. And I think this was the last point. No. So we have seen the value of arts-based data, such as the three-dimensional sculptures, or the collage, which we have in the chapter, which enables elicitation of meaning within professional practice in different ways. And thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Svanborg. And thank you all three groups.